below the surface of a world built by human hands. We honor complexity at the same time we keep things understandable. Do join me. We'll have a lot of fun together.
Weekdays at 5:45 on KSJE.
Hey everyone, it's your host for the World Beat Show, Scott Duran, and I want you to join me every Saturday at 11 a.m., where I take you on a journey around the world and show you traditional and modern style world beat music. Music from Africa, Spain, France, Japan, China, heck, even songs and artists from the United States itself. So join me every Saturday at 11 a.m. only on the KSJE 90.9 FM.
$8:50 a.m. Thursday morning here on KSJE. We have an extra segment for you this morning to talk about an upcoming event with our friends from the Aztec Museum in Pioneer Village. Joan Monninger is back with us, of course. She is the executive director of the Aztec Museum in Pioneer Village. Joan, welcome back to KSJE.
And thank you for having us back again.
You bet. It's always great to have you here. And also another special guest coming to the studio this morning, Dr. Jimmy Miller is here. Dr. Miller, good morning to you.
Good morning, Scott.
No stranger to the campus of San Juan College, a history professor for I don't know how many years. I lost count. Number of them. So
54.
Who's counting? Who's counting? 54. Can you imagine? It's great to have you here, Dr. Miller. Also, we should say, current member of the board and past president of the board of the Aztec Museum. So you know a lot about what we're going to be talking about this morning, which, of course, is this new this year of celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Aztec Museum in Pioneer Village, and some of the amazing people who helped think about what to do with the Aztec Museum, and also the people who kind of thought about the idea of gathering some of these historic structures to make up what we now know as the Pioneer Village. And you're going to present a program about just this very topic.
I am.
Very good. And that's coming up next week, right? Next Friday night?
Next Friday night, yes.
Okay.
A week and a day from now.
That's right, at the museum, and there'll be a concert too, and a whole evening of activities, right, Joan?
That is right. We have the program itself, which is a partnership with the San Juan County Historical Society.
Right.
That begins at 6 o'clock. So gates open at 5:30. Come get your seats. And then at 7 o'clock, we have the Village Band.
Very good. So, cool. It's
all free.
It's all free, and learn a little something. Dr. Miller, what will you be talking about? Is it kind of the history of the organization, I guess, and how it came to be?
Yes. It all began back in the early 1960s. There was a group that met in Farmington and tried to get a county-wide museum effort going, and actually got to the point of getting a bond election scheduled for April of 1960, and unfortunately it didn't pass.
Didn't go. Okay. So what did that mean? Back to square one, I guess?
Yes. They simply, they hadn't lost their enthusiasm, but
right.
They had to go, up different roads and try different things. And
sure.
Almost immediately there was a kind of a division between Farmington and Aztec, and to a lesser extent the Bloomfield community, on where the museum should be. Oh,
well, there's never been a disagreement about that before. About
the great courthouse scandal.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. There's been a lot of documented history a little bit about that. So interesting. So, so that was part of it, right? But then I guess some folks got together and said we want to do this in Aztec.
Well, what actually happened in 1970. There was a bond election, a countywide bond election that everyone agreed to, and it would support $250,000 to construct a museum, primarily an archaeological museum, in Bloomfield. And of course that becomes the San Juan County Historical Association.
That Salmon Ruins then?
And Salmon Ruins
I see.
is where it's located, yes.
Okay.
So at that point, then, both Aztec and Farmington, which had been granted just sort of a casual agreement by the city councils of both Farmington and Aztec that they could use vacant room. In the case of Aztec, it was the old city hall there,
Right.
and they went ahead and actually established their first operating museum by November of 1964. Hence,
Here we are 60 years
60
later.
years later, yes.
Okay, very
Yeah.
interesting. And that was one part of it, of course, having the actual museum building and having exhibits and things like that. But then the extra part that I always find fascinating is the whole Pioneer Village part of the Aztec Museum, because that was a whole other step above just opening up a museum. This was actually finding buildings, historically significant buildings in the county, and then actually buying them or having them donated or what have you, and then physically moving them or disassembling them and moving them and reassembling them on the property there in Aztec. And that's a whole other level of commitment.
Yes, and that movement began in earnest about 1988, and continued without much intermission clear on up until 1996. And that was a really active time for the museum. The museum had expanded a little bit. They had already developed their what we call the Atwood Annex, and that opened in 1984. But it was only a partial solution. They still had this idea that they were going to bring these historic buildings in, and in some cases they were actually historic buildings that were used for the same purpose in the village as they had been in real life.
Right.
In other cases, they were repurposed.
Sure, but still significant.
Oh, yes,
and a
yes.
lot of labor-intensive movements, I would say.
Absolutely,
We're
yeah.
looking at a picture of, this is the chapel at Cedar Hill, I think, right?
The 1906 Methodist Church.
And
at
as it
Cedar
was
Hill.
being disassembled, and very methodically, so that it could be reassembled, then in the
Although
Pioneer
slightly
Village.
smaller, it had to be scaled down.
Little scaled
bit.
down.
But it's still today. It has the original pews. We still do weddings in it.
Right,
It's a really a marvelous structure.
right.
Great piece of history.
Very, very cool. And so that was one example of this type of project, but it's repeated over and over again with all the buildings that are now there.
There are at least 6 different buildings that were brought in during that period of time. There were some also that were built as replica buildings.
Sure.
The schoolhouse, for example, is a good example of that. That was built from scratch.
Right.
And there were others also that were built for a signal purpose. The farmhouse, for example.
Right.
Is a new construction building made to look like it probably was built much
You're right.
earlier.
But here's another picture of a historic one. This is the log cabin that's being put on a trailer for transport to the site. And so this is another one of those buildings that was actually what it was, right?
Yes, and if you'll look at it there on the truck or the
trailer there,
trailer
right?
that
Yeah.
it comes in on, you can see that it doesn't look very presentable at that point. There's lots and lots of work that had to be done on that after it was brought to its present location.
Well, if I was as old as that cabin is, I wouldn't look very presentable either, I must tell you. But that involved a lot of work. And Joan Monninger, I know you've been talking about some of the volunteers and finding some other artifacts about the hours that these volunteers put into some of these
Yeah,
projects,
we were
because all this
fortunate.
was volunteer work, right?
We have people who have kept past records that will tell us, it took, over 1,000 volunteer hours to, I think the church was over 1,000 hours, but
Here's what
a
we
lot
found,
of those
yes.
buildings. Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's interesting because we have people who worked on that stuff that come back in now, and they, again, it's that part of nostalgia. And the concept of it, just to begin with, when you think of it at the time they're putting it together, is that concept of stepping back in time. Already people could see we're getting away from that sort of way of life, and they wanted a way to keep people connected to the past.
Right.
And that is the wonderful thing about our particular museum, is that it allows locals, it allows people from the state, around the region, internationally, and we get about 15 different countries a year, usually a lot of repeats, and they're all coming out to our museum, and we love it.
Right. Well, and they're learning something about the area and the time. And again, back from when some of these buildings were in use in their original purposes, this was a pretty Wild West kind of place, and there are stories, epic stories about some of the feuds and the gunfights and things like that. A lot of folks think it only happened up in Durango, but we had a lot of gunfire down here too during the late 1800s.
The cabin is
The
directly
cabin
tied.
has
That's
a
the
direct
story.
link to that.
That's
too,
right.
yes.
That's very true. And Joan, I would say again to be able to preserve these buildings, because again, if the museum hadn't stepped in, they may have been lost, I suppose, right, to development or just decay as they collapsed or what have you, right?
Exactly. And there's still, there's buildings out there that people would like to see moved onto the grounds. But again, you can see from the records how much money it takes to do that, and the amount of manpower it takes, and it's just really hard to do. And so we work hard right now to keep the museum going and keep these structures. We got an intern out, Angus Leginski, this summer, who's painting and sealing and driving nails in and all this kind of thing. But it's constant upkeep with these buildings.
Right.
But we love it, and we have a great board. We have a great group of volunteers. So
Well, and it's made possible because of the support and memberships of folks who join and support the museum.
Admissions, and it's our 60th anniversary, and our 60th anniversary sponsors who, like KSJE,
Glad to
who
be
are
there.
helping to make this possible and help us keep the word out about all we have going on. And I definitely want to give a shout out again just to the concert also, and
Please.
Hoyle Osborne.
Yeah.
Hoyle has put together this band, the Village Band, along with Mick Hess. They got Don Allen on trombone, Tennille Taylor and Kathy Pope on violins, Allison Carson on cello, and then Rick Burris on euphonium, and Jane Voss on guitar and vocals. And so it is an amazing way to experience historic music. Now, ragtime may not be everybody's first choice. I was at Big Head Tom and the Monsters in Durango last night.
Well, there
but
you go.
we know from history that it's from different experiences. That's where innovation comes from. So bringing families out and coming and enjoying these different styles of music is a wonderful opportunity. And of course, Hoyle Osborne is an amazing music historian and storyteller. So all the pieces, if you don't know Scott Joplin, and you're Mr. Know-It-All, so you know everything.
That.
But if you don't know Scott Joplin or some of these backstories, it's really, really fascinating. It's a fun night. And
Very true.
So, yeah, we want folks to come out for the whole thing.
Looking
and
forward
to hear
to it.
Jimmy, but everybody loves Jimmy.
Yeah, that's a draw no matter what.
It is.
I agree.
It is.
But 6 o'clock, it all starts.
At 6 o'clock it starts.
week
Doors
from
open,
tomorrow?
The gates open at 5:30.
Okay.
Friday the
14th.
14th. Yes.
Very good. Aztec Museum. Joan Monninger, Dr. Jimmy Miller, thank you both for coming in this morning.
Thank
you. Always
Scott.
a pleasure.
Great to see you.
Good to see you.